Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of BacklogBusters, where every other Monday I'm busting out my gaming backlog one video at a time and letting you know if after all these years, these games are worth playing today. In this episode, we're finally getting through a whole year without daylight savings time in Legend of Zelda Oracle of Seasons. By the time you're watching this, there's a brand new Legend of Zelda game, Tears of the Kingdom, on store shelves, and that doesn't happen very often. So in celebration of that new release, I'm finally finishing the first Zelda game I ever owned. It should be apparent after 23 of these videos that I've missed a lot of classic games, either because I wasn't old enough or didn't own a specific console, but the Game Boy Color was the first gaming device I ever owned. My grandmother surprised me with a grape Game Boy Color and a copy of Pokemon Yellow version for my birthday one year, and that still ranks pretty highly on my list of most memorable birthdays ever. So, while every other friend was focused on their fancy polygons on the PlayStation 1 and N64, I was all in on portable gaming, with this Game Boy Color being heavily played on long road trips, just wishing for the stray beam of a car's headlight so I could see the screen when it got slightly dark out. Later getting this incredible light and magnifying glass combo that allowed for peak gaming in a way no modern console has managed to recapture yet. So when a Zelda game only for Game Boy Color showed up years later, my brother and I picked out our versions. I chose Oracle of Seasons, my brother chose Oracle of Ages. And it was an incredible experience to have our own individual Zelda games, and after what felt like months of playing, we both got stuck and couldn't finish either version, but that changes today. The Legend of Zelda Oracle of Seasons was released for the Game Boy Color in 2001 on February 22nd in Japan, May 13th in North America, and October 5th in Europe. The other version, Oracle of Ages, was released on exactly the same day. Nintendo published the Oracle games, which is nothing new for Zelda, but it was developed by Capcom. Wait, Wikipedia says it was developed by Flagship, who were funded and given personnel by Capcom and Nintendo and Sega somehow. Flagship apparently worked on Resident Evil 2, Dino Crisis 2, Onimusa Warlords, and while Nintendo developed Link's Awakening for the Game Boy, Flagship developed every other Zelda game for the Game Boy systems, with Oracle of Ages, Seasons, Link to the Past, and Four Swords, and the Minish Cap. After all those well-known games, it's odd to me that Flagship is no longer around, as it was fully pulled back into Capcom, where it lost its name and semi-independent status in 2007. But let's jump back to today's game. As if Nintendo letting a third party create a mainline Zelda wasn't interesting enough, Flagship was originally going to create a proposed 6 Zelda games, some remakes, some new, and eventually they pared that number down to a trilogy of games known as the Triforce series. And back when IGN had a Babes section, they detailed the proposed trilogy. One game was to focus on action, the chapter of power. One was to focus on puzzles, the chapter of wisdom, while the gameplay focus of the third, chapter of courage, was never officially announced. Each was also to have a theme. The Tale of Power was about the 4 seasons, the Tale of Wisdom was to use a color theme, and the Tale of Courage was to have the theme of time. But one of the most unique things about this trilogy was also slowing down development, as each of the games would link together through a password system or a link cable, and this allowed you to choose any game you wanted as your starting point, then play through the others as a continuation of your storyline in whatever order you chose. But this linking across 3 games became an issue, as IGN reported. The password system across all 3 games was simply too difficult to organize and keep track of. Each individual Legend of Zelda game is already filled with such minute details and special event triggers that programming even one Zelda game is a 2-year process. What a time to be alive when one Zelda game only took 2 years to make. So the trilogy was cut down yet again. Now just 2 games, but with the linking feature still intact, allowing you to still play the games in any order you want. But even with what seems like pretty large changes throughout development, both Ages and Seasons sold and reviewed extremely well, landing in the 90s, with Ages a tiny bit in the lead. Plus, I remember these games very fondly. Even though I never finished either of them, I have a lot more nostalgia for these than the Link's Awakening game that recently got remade, so let's start up Oracle of Seasons and see if this game still holds up today. I've finished a few mainline Zelda games in this order: Twilight Princess, Phantom Hourglass, Link Between Worlds, Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker, Breath of the Wild, and Link's Awakening. And that's it. So my experience with the Zelda games is kind of all over the place, in a weird order, and not as complete as I'd like it to be. But after playing through Link's Awakening in 2019 and really enjoying it, I have to admit it felt a little small, and while there were really nice improvements from the Game Boy version, I became worried that the massive adventure I remembered from my childhood playing Oracle of Seasons was Instead, much smaller and might feel hampered by the limitations of the Game Boy. But once this intro kicked off with just incredible pixel art, the game throws you right into the fray with an oracle kidnapped and the seasons thrown into disarray. After which you'll grab a sword and be exploring your first dungeon and into the action in minutes. And yes, this is of course smaller than any Zelda on your home console, but I was really impressed with the size of Holodrum and how densely it's packed with people, puzzles, cave systems, and with a whole underground world in Subrosia to explore. Then you've got 8 large dungeons to explore, each with their own dedicated item and mechanic that you'll unlock. On top of that, some of the items you collect get upgraded versions as the game progresses, something I didn't realize ever happened in anything but the later 3D entries. And we haven't even gotten to the main bullet point on the box, in the Rod of Seasons. All of my concerns about a Game Boy Zelda not feeling like a proper adventure were gone almost immediately. And other than the limitation of 2 buttons making you switch items a little more frequently than I'd probably like, I was constantly impressed at how this managed to all fit on a Game Boy cartridge and feel this good to play and explore. But it's the main feature of this game that adds even more to the world around you, as after a short stealth sequence early in the game, you'll find the Rod of Seasons, which lets you hop onto a tree stump and change the seasons, starting with winter, then summer, spring, and eventually fall. Each season you gain lets you change the landscape around you, with winter freezing over rivers and lakes that you're unable to swim in, and piling up large snow drifts to reach higher areas. The other seasons change up the world even more. With each new season you gain, you'll open up large areas of the map and usually gain access to the next dungeon. It also never got old to see how every single screen of the overworld changes its layout and theming as you change the seasons. Plus, the traversal puzzles you'll be solving with the seasons are just so inventive and incredibly fun to use. Past the Rod of Seasons though, you'll be doing more than simple block pushing puzzles in these dungeons, with train cars to navigate, secrets hidden in subtle patterns, multi-level pits, and much more, with this really blowing away my expectations for a 2D Zelda game, especially one, again, on the Game Boy. Now I do wish there were more instances of you using all the seasons together once you collect all of them, but it's really only the lead up to the last dungeon or so, plus the seasons are never used in dungeons themselves, only on the overworld, which is a shame only because I would have loved to see a whole dungeon based around these puzzles as well. Even though you leave your seasonal powers at the front door of every dungeon, you'll be unlocking more than enough items to keep you entertained and way more than can possibly fit in Link's, pockets? Sure, you'll get the standard Zelda arsenal of a sword, shield, boomerang, and so on, but thankfully the best item from Link's Awakening shows back up here. Rock's Feather allows Link to experience the joy of jumping freely, and unlike the Adventure of Link, here you can do it while in the top-down sections. This is such a fun power, especially in top-down Zelda games where one small square can prevent your progression. Being able to just leap over it is such a freeing feeling, and I'm not sure I'll ever get tired of this. As you make your way through more of the dungeons, you'll get upgrades to some of your existing items, which I really don't want to spoil, but they make changes to both classic and newer items and give them a big enough twist to keep them feeling fresh and fun to use even late in the game. Plus, with all the items and upgrades you're getting, the enemies and bosses will start to require different combinations of weapons and strategies that really vary things up in a great way that occasionally has you unequip your sword. Again, I don't want to spoil too much of that here, but even this early boss fight against Mothula has such an action-packed feel that I honestly wasn't confident the Game Boy would be able to pull this off with you leaping around and getting hits in. Okay, so there are some things I don't like as much, starting with the trading quest, that I just came away mixed on. It culminates in what I feel is a vital upgrade for your sword, which if nothing else, saves you so much time by letting you break vases with your sword instead of switching on an item, picking up and throwing each vase, and then switching that item off. But it's a 12-item trading quest, with you going all over both the over and underworld, handing items back and forth, and I didn't realize I needed like a notebook nearby to note down every random NPC that says their hot spring is too hot, and even more crucially, remember where they're located. After around 13 hours of playtime where I hadn't managed to trade off even my first item. Maybe Zelda fans know to look out for this, and maybe it's more smooth when you trade as you encounter the new people, but I was not at all prepared to take on this lengthy process, and it just wasn't super fun for me doing all this right at the end. But I've learned my lesson, and I'll definitely keep a notebook beside me in the next Zelda game I play. My biggest complaint with this game is the complaint I have with pretty much every puzzle game and by extension every Zelda game I played. Without fail, I will hit a point where I'm completely lost as to where I should go, what I should do, and what the solution to this current puzzle is, even if this is a puzzle. This game, with its more compact world, made it a little simpler to keep more characters, hints, and dead ends in my head to revisit when I got a new power or something new the game taught me. But there were several times in dungeons where I wandered around a bunch of sealed off rooms trying to gain entry, only to just try pushing every single block until one moved, or push an enemy an extra long time just once, or there's one bush out of several that needs to be lit on fire. Most of the time the game was good at hinting at a solution or teaching me a pattern that it would tweak throughout the dungeon to keep me guessing. But sometimes it felt like a solution just came out of nowhere. The other times I felt lost were when exploring the overworld, especially when looking for the next dungeon you need to get to. Most of the time a dungeon is hinted at with a cardinal direction or some description, but when I needed to somehow piece together that a skeleton will think I'm a stronger warrior after finishing a seemingly unrelated and arbitrary dungeon, then point me in the right direction, I just failed to see the connective tissue that would lead me to that solution they wanted. As with most puzzles, this is going to vary wildly by the person playing, and you may have no issues at all, but it still frustrated me and resulted in more wasted time than I would have liked in some of these cases. Now, with all that in mind, how did I feel about this game overall, and would I recommend The Legend of Zelda Oracle of Seasons as a game that should be on your backlog? Yes, if you like the Legend of Zelda series and haven't played this, I think this is a great entry, and it felt just as well constructed as more modern entries into the top-down Zelda games like Link Between Worlds, which I loved, and older entries like Link's Awakening. Now, if you've gotten stuck, lost, and frustrated in Zelda games in the past, the more condensed map does help a little, and I experienced fewer solutions that felt out of nowhere. But there's just some truly cool stuff here with the dungeons and the seasons mechanic that still feel as fresh as the day I first played this. So you might want to keep a guide handy, maybe to just nudge you in the right direction if you do get really stuck. And I'll throw out my normal message that my opinion on this game is not meant to tarnish any fond memories you have of playing it. And if you love this game or still love it, please tell me why in the comments below. I'd love to hear your experience and talk more about the parts I also really liked. If you'd like to play or replay Oracle Seasons on a physical cartridge, then you've got the original Game Boy Color version. And as with all of the portable Zeldas, they are rising in price. And once again, we visit the graveyard of the eShop, as both games were on the 3DS and Wii U eShops for a very reasonable price, but are no longer available for purchase. Luckily, you've got our handy Nintendo Switch Online subscription, which will someday in the future have these games available, but with Nintendo just drip feeding us Game Boy games, it could take a bit. But in the meantime, I guess you can play Link's Awakening and Minish Cap through the service if you're looking for another portable Zelda. But this is not the end of the story, as we may have defeated one threat, but evil is growing in another land, so tune in 2 weeks from today for the jaw-dropping conclusion to the Oracle series of games. And that's it for this episode of BacklogBusters. Have you played Oracle Seasons? What did you think? Should it be on others' backlogs? Let me know. I'd love to talk more about it. And if you've got a suggestion for another game I should clear up my backlog, please let me know. If you enjoyed the video, hit that thumbs up button, and if you'd like more, tap the subscribe button. And as always, thank you all so much for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye.